My name is Sam Jenks, and welcome to another episode of The Way We Source, a podcast hosted by Kodiak Hub, where we share our talks with procurement practitioners, procure tech leaders, experts, consultants, content gurus, and people that we find downright inspiring, diving into the role that sourcing and procurement plays in the way we live. If you liked today's episode, make sure to rate the program and provide us with a follow. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting a practitioner with a capital P, turned founder. During his 25 plus years in procurement at businesses such as the NHS, United Biscuits, and Carillion. In March 2020, the coronavirus hit us all, and our guests decided that no procurement person should be alone and went all in on community, founding Proctopus, the network and community. Currently, he's serving as the founder and managing director of AVAM Solutions, that is AVAM Solutions, a specialist supply chain and procurement consultancy firm. We're very lucky to have him with us today, Keith McCabe. Keith, welcome to the show.
Hey, Sam, how are you?
I'm doing just fine. It's great to have you on. Let me ask you, Keith, sourcing and procurement, what made you decide to work in the space? Did it choose you or did you choose it?
Well, you know, when I was 8 years old, I had this vision that I wanted to become a procurement director.
Right.
Yeah.
And then when you were at the bars later in life, you thought to yourself, what would be the best job title to tell people that I did?
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, like probably 99% of people that have been on this show in the past, you know, a lot of the time people get into procurement not through design, but you know they get into it through other means. You know, I'd always wanted to do something quite creative in my career, something possibly artistic, maybe something in the media. I loved radio, considered radio for a while, considered teaching, all sorts of things. And then, you know, I left university. I did an arts-based degree at university, English. And like many English graduates, didn't really know what I was going to do when I left. I just did English because I enjoyed it, really. So I ended up working in a sort of a graduate role for a manufacturing company and did various sort of roles there. The thing that always sort of piqued my interest were these mysterious procurement people that I kept coming across to some extent. So I was doing things like, you know, production planning, demand forecasting, dealing with lots of, you know, salespeople and, you know, coming up with all the plans that we needed to get the stuff made. But now and again, I'd come across these purchasing people and they would always be the ones that had the nice cars. Obviously, the salespeople did too. But
yeah, I was about to say.
You know, they'd often be out of the office doing exotic trips to different suppliers. And it was just a sort of a seed that grew in my mind that actually, you know, I'd like to find out a bit more about this. So fast forward a couple of jobs, a couple of companies, and I got the opportunity to, you know, reach a bit of a plateau in what I was doing and got the opportunity to move over to procurement and really embraced it. You know, I really, that was a company called United Biscuits. And, you know, obviously a food manufacturer. And it was just a wonderful experience. And really from then, you know, I did some studies and really got sucked in. So another common thread, I think, with a lot of people that have been on this show before, once you're in, you're kind of in. You're alive a lot of the time with procurement. That's certainly me.
Now, you came from a background. You said you went to school to originally search for something maybe artistic, wound up in the English language. How do you think that creativity plays a role in procurement? Is there a place for creativity in the very process oriented and stringent minds of procurement professionals?
Yeah, I think creativity is essential in procurement. You know, I think there's maybe two extremes within the procurement space. There's a bunch of people who do procurement and are very obsessed with the rules and the regulations, and obviously there's a place for rules and regulations, particularly in the public sector. But then there's the other side, which is far more sort of creative and sort of entrepreneurial almost. I think there's loads of ways that you can be creative in procurement. I like to think of procurement as basically commercial problem solving. That's the sort of the neatest definition I can come up with. And obviously, to solve any kind of problem, the more creative you can be, I think, the better. Because obviously, there's many ways of solving a problem. Sometimes you have to look a little bit sort of outside of the typical in order to get to the right solution. So, whether you're looking at a way of designing a strategy for negotiating with a supplier, or you've got some sort of supply chain problem that's causing problems to the business, or you need to create a category plan. I think the best procurement people are the ones that can actually try and approach things from different angles, and fuse different ideas together. I think every day I'm trying to be creative in the way I approach procurement problems.
Inspiring, and I think a view that's interesting for our listeners to be able to hear when it comes to the role of procurement, one that you've been in for quite some time now. You've, I'm sure, had a lot of different experiences from a lot of different organizations, but you mentioned to me offline that you had an old quote from a manager that inspired me. I loved this quote. You just mentioned the fact about procurement being entrepreneurial. And you mentioned to me offline that a manager had once said to you that procurement is one of the last entrepreneurial roles. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think if you think about what your understanding, or certainly what my understanding of what an entrepreneur is, you think about on one extreme you've got these big, hugely successful kind of personalities in the media that are famous for buying and selling businesses. That's one kind of extreme version. But for a lot of people, being an entrepreneur is about running a business, being commercial, having a sensible approach to risk and how you manage risk and how you identify and take advantage of opportunities. I think all of those things do apply to procurement. I think my old boss was absolutely right. I think procurement gives you the freedom in a lot of ways to think creatively, as I was just saying, to solve problems. But every day you're making decisions that will have a big impact on the business in which you work. Almost every day you're dealing with change. Either change that you're in the middle of managing, or sort of upcoming change. You're dealing with risk. You're identifying risk. You're working out how you're going to mitigate the risk. You're looking at innovation. With your supply chain, you're looking at ways that you can do things better, ways you can jointly develop new products. All this is kind of entrepreneurial, I think, in the kind of spirit. And you think about other professions, I'm not sure there are many where you can get that kind of breadth of entrepreneurial kind of skills. So obviously I've since, founded a company. So I'm an entrepreneurial in a different sense now, but even for people who are within the corporate world, I still think it's possible to operate and behave quite entrepreneurially.
Yeah, fantastic insight, and I think inspiring when it comes to that entrepreneurial spirit. Do you have any moment in time you think back to a tactic that you pulled out of your bag of tricks, a particular project or negotiation that you were in where you saw and remembered being truly entrepreneurial, and maybe a story that could be able to inspire somebody that's listening in on a way that they could also be entrepreneurial?
Yeah, sure. So I think if you take risk as an example, so when I was with the United Biscuits, we had a perennial problem. So I used to buy flour. That was one of the things that I used to buy. And at one stage, I think I was the biggest buyer of this type of flour in the whole of the UK. So it was a tricky challenge.
Was that the story that you told at the bar then?
Yeah, that really impressed people. I buy more flour than everyone else.
Yeah.
But it was hundreds of thousands of tons of the stuff. So if you think about all your biscuits that you like dunking in your tea, and all the crackers you like to have with cheese, and all these things, they all need flour. Yeah. And so we had to get hold of a lot of it. Now, the traditional way we'd always done that was that we would wait until the harvest, where the wheat had been grown, and then we would negotiate with basically the millers, who would then have bought that wheat and mill it into flour. And so we were always constrained by time, because there was only a very short period of time between the wheat being grown and them needing to sell it, where you could negotiate. And also, you didn't always know the quality of the harvest, and the weather in the UK. I'm not sure what it's like where you're based. You're in Sweden, aren't you, Sam? But
yes, correct. So there's limited types of crops here, but very good with root vegetables. So
okay. Well, certainly in the UK, we can have 4 seasons in a day. So, yeah. And the quality of the weather leading up to harvest can have a big impact on the amount of wheat produced and also the quality. So we had this problem where we had to do things quickly, and also we didn't know the quality and therefore the price of the wheat. So doing deals before harvest was impossible, and doing deals after harvest was quite rushed and pressured, because we were kind of behind the pace.
Yeah, and you didn't really have the negotiation power, so to say, either.
Exactly. So one of the things that I started when I was there is, in a similar way to the way they'd been managing cocoa and oil, was to look at the financial markets as a way of sort of hedging the flour risk that we had. So what I was able to do, and of course, like everything, we started with a trial and then rolled it out further. What I was able to do was to buy a load of wheat futures on the financial markets as a hedge against what the future flour price might be. So even at a time where we couldn't buy the flour physically, we could still lock in at the price that we liked. Obviously, then if the price went up later, we would make a profit on the futures, and then that would offset the increased price of the flour we were going to sell. So that's a million miles away from the way that people had traditionally done it. Yeah. And is quite a good example of a risk-based approach, looking at things out of the box in terms of how you do things in business. And so that would be an example that springs to mind. But there's plenty of others. I think you don't have to look too far, and it doesn't always have to be a really big thing. It could be for example, entrepreneurs are often obsessed with creating great relationships. And so just the way that you develop and manage your relationships within a company can be another example of being entrepreneurial.
Fantastic. I love the anecdote, and I hope that anyone that's listening in is able to draw some type of inspiration from it. When it comes to your career in procurement, it's you've had your hands in a lot of different pots, and I think that you can hear that, of course, in your experience, right? You like to test new things, or at least that's my kind of my way of reading into it. I'm curious because you made your transition from your early days of being an individual contributor into being a leader. What do you think that it takes to make that transition, right? From one that is buying, being the operational and or maybe strategic procurement or sourcing professional, to really transitioning into that leadership role?
Yeah, I think when you're doing a kind of an individual role, it's all about yourself, isn't it? Obviously, you're part of a structure and a team, but you are personally delivering stuff. And I think as you move into more of a leadership role, much more of what you deliver is going to come through other people. And there are parallels there with working as a supply chain or a procurement manager as well, because of course, the success that you have is only going to be delivered through not people this time, in a sense of people that work for you, but suppliers who have their own people who are indirectly working for you.
Yeah.
So I think it's about, for me, I've always been a bit of a control freak, so that was always one of the.
You're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah. So I think putting your faith, learning to trust people, putting your faith in good people, is absolutely vital, and also picking the right people. Sometimes people are not going to be capable of what you're asking, and that comes down to how you recruit and build teams.
Yeah,
you need to have a team that you can trust and that you can delegate to, and that can deliver, on your behalf. So I think that was one of the big learning curves I had, and still have to this day. Even now when I'm doing something and I need somebody's support to do all or some of it for me, I'm always grappling with the kind of, are they going to do it to the same standard that I'd like to do it? And I've learned that, I'm not perfect, right? So they, quite a lot of the time, and if not all the time, they do it better than I would have done it anyway. So there's a kind of a humbling thing there. But secondly, you just have to, and it comes through experience, you just have to let people, give them the chance to thrive, and 9 times out of 10 they will absolutely smash it. So that's what I've learned.
Yeah, and you alluded there to like kind of the development that's happened in your professional career in procurement, that transition that you've made and the lessons that you've learned. If we take kind of a bird's eye 30,000 foot view of your career, right? What do you think are some of the key ways that you've seen beyond kind of this transition from individual contributor to, leader in the organizations you've been in and the things that you've learned along the way? What are some of the other key ways that you've seen your profession, but more so the profession of procurement, the role of procurement evolve in the last 25 years?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's no doubt that it has evolved and changed over time. I think when I first got into procurement, it was very much about the numbers, about cost savings, about spreadsheets and calculating how much how many savings you'd made that day, and keeping a running total. And I still think that's really important. So there's no doubt that procurement has evolved beyond that, but that is still, in my opinion, a very important part of procurement. And I think before I go on to talk about how I think it's changed, and I do think it's changed, I do think it's worth calling out. I think there's far too many procurement people at the moment who are almost, in their attempt to show that procurement is not just about savings, they almost don't want to mention savings at all.
Interesting.
And it's like a dirty word, don't mention the savings. I mentioned it once and I think I got away with it.
It's a bit, if I could draw a parallel, it's a bit like sales, right? You're not allowed to talk about the revenue you're creating, right? You have to talk about value you're creating.
Yeah,
right?
Sure. And if, look, like I totally get it. And I'm going to talk, I've got a few things that have popped into my head about, how I think it's evolved. It is not just about savings, but it is partly about savings. And I just think, we're kidding ourselves if we start thinking that, we're just here for other reasons. So, but that was the sole focus, I think, when I first went into it. And, even at the expense at times of, of quality, people wouldn't admit it, but, there was a drive to save money almost at any cost. I think over time, there's probably a few key trends. I think. I mean, technology now plays much greater role in the way that procurement people operate. Technology now does a lot of the stuff automatically that people used to spend manual time doing. I think there's much more of a look towards overall value and risk management. So not just savings, but how can procurement help drive revenue within a company? How can How can we work with suppliers to innovate and create things that people want to buy rather than just chopping layers off things that have you've already been providing. And I think obviously sustainability is the key one. So I think there's an increasing focus on developing sustainable solutions within procurement now. That I think is really up there. Is really up there now in terms of what's the most important thing for procurement. Well, as I said, I think it's commercial problem solving, but to provide value, a general term that can encompass a lot of things, but also provide sustainability, sustainable solutions, and I think so. I think and sustainability in its widest sense. So covering environmental, covering ethical sourcing, covering good governance, all that kind of stuff. But it's really important. So I think there's been an increasing shift towards that over the period I've been involved in the game.
Yeah. I guess it hit me this thought. Do you think that savings will ever be less important than the sustainable choice?
I think it depends on who you ask. So I'm yet to find an FD who will, hand on heart, honestly say that the savings bit isn't important. But look, sustainability is crucial because not only is it the right thing to do, for the planet, for the companies involved, it often, not always, but it often brings with it commercial benefits as well. Right. If you're reducing waste and doing things more efficiently, and it's a key value now in many businesses. That they because consumers want it. Most consumers want to buy things from companies who are seen as sustainability champions.
Right.
So I don't think there's any getting away with it. But like I said before, I do think it's I don't think it's an either or. I think too many people are saying, well, we don't do that anymore. We just do this. Well, actually, I think you're doing a bit of both. I think there's a combination there that remains really relevant.
Yeah. Well said. You've worked at companies, I mean, a bit of diverse background, right? NHS, definitely in the public sector, United Biscuits, as you mentioned before, Carillion as well. I mean, what's been the most interesting learning? If you could break it down, take one learning that you've had from each of those particular journeys.
Yeah.
What would that be?
So I started AVAM Solutions about 5 years ago. So I'll come on to talk about what I've learned as I've become independent, if you like, after this, because I think that's also been fascinating in terms of what I've learned. But in terms of prior to that point, so if you take, I've already touched on it, but my time at United Biscuits was a manufacturing environment. So I think what I learned was just how real what you were buying was. You would go to a supplier's factory, you would see the raw materials that you're negotiating going through machinery and being refined and and developed ready for you to take away. You'd see how the logistics was organized. You'd know the factories that you had that they were going to. You'd know the factory managers and the operations teams. And you'd really understand, that there is there was a real significant and immediate impact.
Yeah, the value you're delivering to the end business becomes very material, right?
Absolutely. The absolute, it was always drummed into me, the absolute worst thing you can do is to stop a factory, even if it's only for, an hour, because you can never get that time back. It's a disaster. So maintaining continuity of supply and making sure, if you were changing supplier, making really sure that they weren't going to let you down. So it was a kind of realness and immediacy within a manufacturing environment that I learned. And, I've gone on to work in more service-based environments, which is a different challenge. But certainly within that first one, it was the kind of the immediacy. And I think actually COVID and all the supply disruptions, perhaps we'll talk about that a bit more later on, has reminded us of the importance of continuity of supply. Because I think for a long time, I observed companies sort of taking that for granted because we all got so good at it. We all got so good at making sure stuff just always arrived.
Yeah.
And I think COVID kind of, reminded us actually, that's really important. You've got to keep working really hard to make sure that is the case. Because within a manufacturing environment, COVID would have been a nightmare to navigate through, no doubt. At the NHS, it was a different challenge. So I joined the NHS through a leadership program. It was looking at bringing in private sector people into the public sector.
Interesting.
A bit like what I was saying earlier, in terms of like different approaches, different ways of thinking. That's what, at the time, it was a program they were running just to try and get some new perspectives in. I think with the NHS, there were lots of things I learned. I think if I was going to pick one out, it would probably be the sort of the power of networks. So, the NHS is an absolute monster, as I'm sure you know. And I only worked for one primary care trust, a very small piece in a very big machine. But, you're operating within a system. So you had to learn how to build and manage networks effectively. If you're going to get major changes agreed and done, you really couldn't work in a vacuum. So sort of working in that kind of huge environment, matrix style, lots of different bodies all kind of interacting with each other. That was a key learning there. I think Carillion, I think that there was a few things at Carillion. So I get a very human level observation. When I joined Carillion, I soon found out that there was a pretty major clash of personalities between me and one of the people that I would be working quite closely with.
Okay.
And, having to kind of navigate that situation, which I haven't really had since or before, was a challenge that I wasn't familiar with. But it taught me a lot about resilience. It taught me a lot about, building relationships, working hard. Because I think, we ended up working, fairly well together, even though we were never going to be best friends. That taught me a lot. But I think the other thing I'd say would be about flexibility. So, Carillion was an organisation which was dynamic, ambitious. It was always trying lots of new things. Maybe too much in hindsight because of the way Carillion ended up, unfortunately. But you certainly had to always be ready to embrace opportunities. And I think, within the narrative of being a procurement person, looking for opportunities, working on them, embracing them, really important facets and really helped me in that regard.
Fantastic insights from all three of those as well. I mean, you said it before, right? Once you're in, you're in. And I mean, I hear that you've been in this and you're still in this. You doesn't sound like you're ever going to leave this space, right? Why do you think that that's the case? I mean, why do people stay in procurement? Why have you stayed in procurement for so many years?
Honestly, can't think of anything else that I could do that would give me the same enjoyment. If you look at what I do now at AVAM Solutions, we've obviously got lots of different clients, and there's a real variety that I get on a daily basis that that you'd be hard pressed to find elsewhere, I think. So for sure, that always gives me energy. I love meeting new people, working in different sectors, working with new companies, just that variety. But also the other thing, I love elements of procurement. I absolutely love. I love negotiation. I always look at it as there's a bit of a game actually. I love games, so but I enjoy the process and working with somebody to try and find a really good outcome. I love problem solving, as I said a few times. I just think I haven't found something else that would give me the same enjoyment, I don't think. Plus, I'm too old now. They wouldn't employ me to do anything else now, I've been doing it too long.
I think you'd be just fine. And I'm sure that there's plenty of people who are listening to this episode that would love to have their Keith McCabe by their side. Listen, you said just now, you love the game of negotiation. And I think that you have to, if you're in procurement, you have to, if you're in enterprise sales like myself. Is it okay, doubling back to the item of creativity, is it okay to get creative, to make a deal happen with the supplier? Or is it important, in your opinion, that a negotiation stays close to your chest, right? That you really don't show your cards to the supplier?
I don't want to sit on the fence.
No, take an opinion. That's the best thing.
Yeah, but I'll just start by saying I do think it depends. So I think, if without doubt the best approach in the right circumstances is to be really open. But if you
and how do you maybe we could walk it through like this, like tactically, how do you do that in the right way that it doesn't then put you in a position that you are not having the crappier hand, but having the worst outcome of the two, or worst outcome of the two. That's the wrong way of putting it. Having a bad outcome for your business, right?
Yeah, no, I know where you're getting at. I think that's what I was sort of saying. It does depend a little bit. So if you go into a negotiation as the honest broker, I'm going to be really clear here, really be open about what I want. I expect you to do the same, that kind of thing. There is a risk, if you've evaluated the situation poorly, that the other side will exploit that openness and use it against you. And so I do think you need the right conditions. So the best approach is definitely to be open, but with the right, party. And that's where your preparation comes into play. So, hopefully when you are negotiating with somebody, it's somebody you've already got some form of relationship with. It might not be very well established. It might still be early days, but, you should know enough about them to be able to work out whether you can be open with each other. Because frankly, there's people I've negotiated with in the past, and you just know that they're not able to think that way, and so you kind of have to choose your tactics a little bit depending on who you're up against.
Sure.
Like in a sport, you wouldn't have the same tactics for every team you face. But having said that, yes, I think the best approach is always to be open. It's about collaborating. It's all the buzzwords, really. You want win-win outcomes and all that kind of stuff. Of course you do. Who wouldn't? But, and I do think there's a bit of vulnerability you have to show in a negotiation. You have to be prepared to say, this is what I want. This is what I'm looking for. The key thing I've learned, I can't remember which book it was in. It was in one of the famous negotiation books. The key bit I always remember was the bit about focusing on underlying interests and not the positions. And that, a bit of a bland statement, but when you think about it, actually, it means a hell of a lot. It carries a lot of weight. Because I started my career just focusing on positions. I want X, Y, and Z. You want A, B, and C. I can't give you C. I might give you B if you give me X, all that kind of stuff. And you end up trading off, and you end up, probably somewhere in the middle where no one's particularly happy.
So how does it look if it's the underlying interest instead of the positions then?
Well, that's it. So it took me a long time to meaningfully get my head around this. But, you're thinking about, okay, well, I want a price rise. Right? If you're a salesman, that might be what you go into a negotiation with. Or if you're a buyer, I want a price reduction. Why? What is the underlying interest behind that position that you're taking? Now, sometimes it's easier to see what these are than others. But, if you take a salesman, a price rise, why do they want the price rise? Well, because maybe their material costs have gone up, so they need to protect their margin. Maybe they are under pressure for other competitive pressures, and they need to maybe they're trying to become more premium in the marketplace. It could be all sorts of things. But the point is that it can be easier to work together on, well, how can we both help you achieve that? So from a procurement person, we often want a price reduction. Why? Well, normally because we want to maintain how competitive our products are out on the shelves, in a retail environment, for an example. Well, how else can we be competitive? Is there a way that we could develop something that was another compelling reason for someone to buy the product other than price? Could we develop something unique? Could there be something sustainable that we could come up with that people would be attracted to? Could that actually involve a change in the specification? Could that specification be cheaper? Might it mean that we buy less of something from you, but more of something else? All these kinds of things. Because then you're looking more holistically at the issue and the underlying interest behind the position you originally took. It just gives you a better chance. And the reason it's important is because we're human beings. And if we entrench ourselves in positions, we can either lose value or we can lose face. And we don't like doing either of those things. So if you focus on the interest underneath, then it's a way that you can both work at something without being too fussed about winning and losing, because you're looking at it in a different way.
Fantastic insight. The underlying interest, not the position. I think that it's if you take one thing with you from this episode, I know I'm going to take that away with me. Fantastic tip and fantastic insight. At AVAM Solutions that you've now founded, first and foremost, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you guys are doing. But as a second part of that, I'm curious, you mentioned you get to context switch a lot, right? That's why I love my role as well. I get to be talking to a global telecom company and then a pneumatics provider in, the span of 2 hours. What do you think, though, that you've taken from your time as a practitioner that's really helped you transition into that role, being, that consultative figure and that advisor?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with the last thing first. In terms of transitioning, I think the key thing that I've learned, so I'm basically doing consultancy now for clients through my company, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we do in a minute. But the key thing I've learned is it's great to have theory. And I think it's really important to have theory. If procurement's to be taken seriously as a profession and not just a job, I think, belonging to membership groups and studying is really important, because other professions do that. I think it's important that we do that if we want to be seen as a profession. If you don't, then don't. But if you do, I think you need to. Having said that, I think when you are working for a client, I think the key thing they need is practicality. So all the theory in the world is great, and it might help you get there in terms of what solution you're proposing, but clients want practicality. They don't want fancy frameworks. They don't want theories. They want something that works, something that they have a sense of that will work in the real world. And I think that's probably the key takeaway I've learned, is that you've always got to keep grounded, keep it simple, really try and avoid using too much jargon.
Yeah.
Talk to them in their own terms, but always, you're looking for something practical that works and delivers.
At the same time, I have to say, Keith, because I'm exposed to consultants myself, to management consultants as well. I'd say very, very many that are in the space would actually be the opposite, right? They would tag themselves to the theoretical. They would be the strategy and the framework person. I think that this maybe has been impacted somewhat by your days as a practitioner, because I think that, that transition and your focus on practicality, you're going into a business, what a practitioner needs, right? In a totally different way.
Yeah, I'd like to think that's what differentiates us a little bit. So I am, as I was described, really, but also other people that I use, are not career consultants. We only use people who have been in the trenches or sat in the seats that the clients are sat in. So we have that kind of empathy and understanding of what is likely to work, what is not, that kind of thing. And I do think that's kind of what sets us apart. So just briefly, so we're a supply chain and procurement consultancy. We've been going, like I said, about 5 years now, and we really do four things. So we look at cost reduction opportunities for clients, without compromising on quality or value, but cost reduction services, particularly in the current climate. Always really important to make sure that you're not spending too much. We look at contract and performance management as a second thing. So, this is something that happens very often, is that companies will invest all their time in getting a deal, and then when they've got the deal, they kind of almost lose interest in it. And the supplier that was brought in doesn't get much support. They don't get the value that, the company doesn't get the value they expected. And, it's a disaster because, the value is only there when it's realized. It doesn't exist on a piece of paper. So
supplier relationship management ends when the contract gets signed, and then it goes back into the business, right? It's
absolutely.
Not a life cycle approach.
I know you guys, at Kodiak Hub, understand supply chain relationship management. But a lot of people don't. And so, we try and provide that support to them. We provide interim resources to deliver projects as and when people need people just for a period of time. And then we help companies build procurement strategies. So they're the kind of the four main areas. And as you said, we don't specialize in a particular sector. So part of what I love is the variety. I also think a lot of what we do is quite transferable. I think a lot of the discipline, maybe not the subject knowledge of a particular category, but I think that can be learned quite quickly. I think what the value that we bring is in the sort of the commercial approach and the approach to just tackling, as I said before, commercial problems. So we work with people in manufacturing, facilities management, construction, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, public sector, you name it, we've had a little dabble. So, hopefully, if there's someone listening that thinks, oh, well, these guys might be able to do a great job for us, but it doesn't sound like they've worked in our sector before, at least let's have a conversation and then we'll see.
Well, you've shared fantastic insights here today, and I can only imagine that the work that you guys are doing at AVAM Solutions is equally as quality. I would love to round things off, but before I let you go, I have to ask you, because you got 20,000 plus LinkedIn followers. You've grown this huge network. I assume that part of that was, kind of growing the Proctopus network, but another part of it is really the focus and the investment in time and effort that you have in your network, but also the content on LinkedIn. You put a lot of humor into procurement. I'm just curious, do you think that humor has a place in the space of procurement?
I think it should have a place. I don't think it has. I don't think it's often there, but I think it should be there.
Let's maybe rephrase the question. How do you think that we could get some more humor into the space of procurement, or does it have to be so serious?
Well, no, I don't think. I mean, I think you can take your job seriously without taking yourself seriously. Yeah. And I think, I've done a cartoon which goes out weekly. Kind of similar a little bit to the Dilbert cartoons that have been going for years, but this is a procurement Bert, the character I developed, and he just works within the procurement space. But just generally, comes up against situations and things that I think a lot of people that work in procurement find quite relatable. And I think the ability to sort of empathise with other people that are in a similar spot and have a bit of a laugh.
Maybe laugh at yourself as well.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. No, it's good fun, and we've been able to do some good. Did a fundraiser associated with it this year, and managed to raise £13,000 for the homeless charity shelter, which just goes to show, as well as being good for us to have a laugh, it can have a positive context as well. But that's all down to the followers that I've got who are great on LinkedIn. They seem to enjoy what I do, and they're fantastic. And just also touching on the Proctopus thing, I think procurement, for people that don't know, I formed Proctopus with half a dozen other people during COVID, and the reason was that procurement had kind of always been a little bit isolated in their job, or it can feel like that at times, because you're doing things, you're affecting change, and you're doing things that can make you feel a little bit alone at times within organisations. It sometimes feels like you're the only one pushing in one direction and everyone else is pushing against you. If you combine that with COVID and the fact that people were physically isolated as well, we just sort of collectively came up with this idea that wouldn't it be great to have a kind of a community of procurement people that could just bounce ideas off each other, provide some support. There was obviously a lot of people going through redundancies during COVID. They could help people secure work, but that whole mental health thing. And so that's what we did. We just formed this network. Occasionally we're having a meetup in January in London, which anyone's invited to. So anyone listening to this that fancies, if you look on LinkedIn, you'll find the details. I think it's what's it called now? Procury or something. They called it Proc something, but it's in January. We're just having a physical get together. So it's very informal, but it's just a network of people that are in procurement and can kind of have that support structure, which we thought was really important. So love doing that as well. But yeah, I think going back to your original question, I think humour is really important. I think the more we can smile and find the humour in what we do, the better it is for all of our mental health, really.
Well, we thank you for taking the time to come on and spread some of your joy with our listeners today. It's been a fantastic time having you on. Before I let you go, I have to do a quick fire round here. 1 word answers, 1 sentence answers, nothing about procurement whatsoever. Is that okay?
Okay, deal. Let's do it.
All right. You have the opportunity to have 1 car in your driveway. What car is that?
I probably have the car I've got now, which is a Tesla. Which I've never had a fancy car before, and I absolutely adore it. And it's got Netflix in it as well, which is brilliant.
I've also seen the thing where you can press the button and it does the dance as well. It's very exciting.
Yeah, it does like a little disco dance in your driveway. Yeah, neighbors love that.
All expenses paid trip. You're heading out tomorrow. You can go by yourself. You can take your family. Where are you heading?
I'll probably go back to Paradise Island in the Bahamas. So that's where I went on honeymoon with my wife. It is as beautiful as the name suggests. Stunning. I'd like to go back there and take the kids who have since arrived to see how cool it was. But it's a beautiful place.
Listen, the second they get wind of this, then they're gonna plan the trip. So have fun. All right. Last question. A book
I meant
or a
Skegness then in that case.
I'm sorry?
I should have said Skegness in that case.
Right.
Be a lot cheaper.
A book or a podcast that's on your bedside table or something you're listening to on a weekly basis or like, doesn't have to be from a professional realm either.
I'm a little bit overly obsessed with true crime stuff at the moment. So I love any sort of true crime podcasts. I think my favorite one is one called That Chapter, which is an Irish guy called Mike that presents it. I don't know his surname, but he's ever so good. They cover really dark subjects, but he does it, again, with humour. which, sometimes you think, well, not appropriate to have humour here, but I think it's always appropriate to find the humour in strange places, and I love it. So highly recommend that, either on YouTube or on Spotify or whatever you listen to your podcast on. That chapter, very good.
Good suggestion. And if our listeners want to, in some way, shape, or form, get in touch with you, know what you're doing at AVAM Solutions, or try and, of course, be a part of your network, what's the best way to do so, Keith?
They could find me on LinkedIn. So Keith McCabe, if you search for me, I'll be there. There's some contact details on LinkedIn. You can email the company at hello@avamsolutions.com. They're probably the best ways. You can come and see me. I will buy you a coffee. I live in Chorley. There's lots of ways of finding me. I'm not that hard to find.
Well, I suggest anyone that's listening in to take the time to reach out to Keith. Keith, thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Sam.